Good evening, everybody. Hi, August. August is the picture, and we're for Diane Falk. August is my downstairs neighbor's dog. He's a very sweet boy. Hi, August. Um,
Hello, James. Sorry, we're recently out of the pool and my hair is a little wild, so I'm not on video.
no problem. Maybe I could use that excuse, could I? No, my hair's just stupid, like it always is. Except now, today, it's stupidly short. So there you go.
And I'm wearing a hat because I'm having a bad hair day.
Okay, and Kate Montgomery seems to have a cat in her lap. Okay.
She screams unless I pick her up.
No.
I have to hold her. She gets very whiny.
At 20 to 7, my dog will start barking behind me because she'll be reminding me that at 21 minutes of 7, she should have been fed. So she has an unbelievably accurate clock inside. So I'm hoping, because she was fed late for breakfast, that she won't do this, but I don't have a lot of hope. As opposed to, how about this for a segue? Nancy, let's talk about a book full of hope. Okay.
All right. Welcome to the April Arcadia Book Club and our discussion of Klara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. Take it away, James Bonin.
That's it? That's what you're going to say? That's your introduction?
That's my introduction of you.
Oh, thanks a lot. Okay. How is everybody tonight?
Good.
Oh, good. Okay.
How do you pronounce the author's name?
Say it again, Nancy.
Kazuo Ishiguro.
Thank you.
So I guess the first provocative thing I want to ask is, well, maybe I'll ask something a little different first. How many of you have read other books of his? I assume quite a few people have, yeah, because he's so well known. Oh, good. I mean, there are certain books of his that have stayed in my brain for so long, and you know, you kind of, he never really, I love the quietness of the way he writes. And in a book like this, one of his favorite tricks is what I want to ask you about, which is the way he intentionally withholds information. So, you know, you have to keep really paying attention, or at least I do, to figure out, well, where are we, and who is this person, and why are people behaving like this? And I actually love that. I mean, very few writers hold back as much as he does, so that you're sort of doing this, you know, this very slow movement through the book. And in this case, you're kind of learning at the pace that Klara is learning and figuring things out as she goes. And, you know, all of a sudden there'll be this odd thing where you realize, wait, what is she talking about? The way her eyes work and the way that her eyes compartmentalize things. And, you know, and you think, now most other writers would tell me what's going on, and he doesn't. And I really admire that. I think it's risky as hell, but I really admire it. But what do people think about that? I mean, does that make you crazy, or does it make you more engaged in the story? You know, that's just sort of to me, one of the keys to him. Okay, any thoughts on that? Oh, yes, Caitlin. Yes, Caitlin.
I had the same thought, but I think about it as the brave step was telling the story from Klara's perspective. And I think it's this, you know, amounts to the same thing. But what I found super interesting about that is when I would get a little frustrated that I didn't know what was going on, Klara is completely calm and fine. Like, she has no stress level of not knowing things, or not understanding why certain people are doing things. Like she thinks it's a problem with herself, like she just doesn't get it yet. So I think that her innocence and her openness to just accepting what she knows and what she doesn't, and then learning as she goes, made me less frustrated about it, in a sense,
Oh,
or
that's good.
more willing to accept not knowing.
Anybody else feel that? Oh, yeah, Linda.
Well, I had a real problem sorting out the robotic versus the sophisticated human aspect of the robot. And I finally, I do agree with you about not giving everything away. But what puzzled, it did puzzle me. I think I finally figured it out. But when she started seeing things in squares,
Boxes.
it was emotion. I felt it was moment of tension and anxiety where she was trying to absorb and integrate what's going on. So when she doesn't really understand, she's seeing these different pieces.
Yeah.
That's what I finally concluded, that was her tension, anxious learning moment. If a robot can have emotions.
That's a great, because I think that's really is what was happening, although it's never spoken that that's what's happening. And if you read, I've read a lot of criticism about the novel, most of it very good, but the people who were annoyed by it were annoyed by things like that, where they just described that to some kind of technical glitch within her. And I think, but I'm on your side, Linda. I think it's meant to be an emotional glitch, and that's part of the sort of scary door that I think the novel opens. Is the closer that someone like Klara starts to feel like a human. I think there's a moment in the book where
Milk's here.
What happened?
Keep going, James.
I think he's talking to somebody else.
Sorry, I didn't know I was unmuted. Our milkman came.
Oh, wow. Your milkman. What? There's milk? There's milk delivery in outer space? Wow. I can't even get milk.
Overweiss Dairy delivers once a week directly to your house.
To the Milky Way.
I'm sorry. I was going to ask a question. What about the fact that after she tries to sabotage that machine, some of her liquids gone out? That seems to have a impact on her perception and her functioning.
Yeah, it did. I agree. Although not as much as I think she feared, it seemed. I mean, she seemed to sort of settle back down after having it took her a while to sort of recalibrate, or for her system to recalibrate. But there's on page 221, there's wait, did I write down the wrong page here? But there's a quote that now for some reason is not jumping out of right at me, but it's the whole idea about the fear that human beings are losing their uniqueness, and the sense of why, the better that artificial intelligence gets, and the more highly refined that the robotics become. And as you remember, Klara is a sort of second level artificial friend, and the third level has better physical qualities and more cognitive skills. But one of the things that the third level seems to have less of is empathy, which is probably not a good trade-off, in an artificial friend or an actual friend. But I think that partly what Ishiguro is fearful of And this is his lecture when he won the Nobel Prize is really a beautiful, beautiful speech. But one of the things that he's fearful of in that lecture, and it bleeds into this book, the lecture was given in 2017 when he won the Nobel, is the fact that the more the world becomes able to create plausible substitutions for us, it will lead to less patience and less sense of that we're all worthy of some kind of compassionate response, and so that in a society, that if human life feels just like artificial life, then and thereby we lose our uniqueness, then I think he's quite nervous about what that might mean within societies, and obviously with society versus society. And so, this book is filled with these odd words, and Josie's dad has been substituted, and been replaced by some kind of robotic system doing his job, and the clothing is high rank versus whatever the thing that isn't high rank is, and of course Josie herself, has that creepy sort of feeling of being lifted, and thereby giving her a chance at seemingly the fewer and fewer human jobs that have real value. And so it's, I'm sorry, I'm just kind of trying to get some of the themes that really jump out at me into play. But all of those things just kind of get laid in, to sort of circle it back to the withholding of information. It gets, that little moment with Josie's father happens quite late in the book. And for a long time, you have no idea why Josie is sick, or for that matter, why normal teenage kids would need an artificial friend. So it's just such a provocative thing. And then to tie into what Caitlin said, when Klara is in the store before she's sold, she has a fear that she'll never be sold because now she's, class 2, the class, the A3 or whatever they are, have already come in, and she gets shuttled back to the middle of the store. But when she's in the window, her whole sense of the world changes, because she can see more of it and see more clearly, and she can watch, the way people really interact. And it's just, I don't know, there's just something about the way that, and then of course, the other theme that sort of sneaks in there when she can see this is she can see this terrible machine that's creating, and she names things just by what she sees. She remember when she's in that barn and she sees the red shelves, and in her mind, it's the same red shelves that were in the store. They're just called the red shelf because that's what's imprinted on her. But so the name of the machine that creates the pollution becomes the evil in her mind, and that is a sort of representation of not just a societal degradation that seems to be happening, but an environmental degradation too. And it also, how many of you assumed we were in America at the beginning of the book? I
think I did. Yeah, I think
had no idea where we were.
I wasn't sure, but
Yeah, and finally, at a certain point, but maybe 80 or 10 or 100 pages in, he mentions something that plants it in America. And then you realize, okay, if it's America, then this is not an America that I know, but it's certainly an America that I could see, in the near future. So suddenly, then you're sort of grounded in a different reality.
I thought the store was in Manhattan, or maybe that was just my imagination.
Yeah, it certainly felt certainly a very large urban area, but it's never really said where it is. Or did I just miss it?
I thought it was, if I could just sort of pick up on some of what you said, Jim. First of all, the idea that he let things drop, that you didn't know what they were. I was really struck that in almost any other book, if I would have seen the word lifted, I would have gone back to say, oh, did I miss something? Did he define it earlier? But he writes in such a tight, such a precise way that I just knew with him, he was doing that to us, that I just was going to have to wait. But not every author can pull that off. I mean, because you start to think that you missed something, I think. So I think it's a testament to his writing skill. But the other thing I was going to mention is that, with Klara, we got to see if people can create an artificial being, what qualities they want. That this was who could be a good friend. Someone is equanimity and calm, as somebody mentioned, and dutiful, almost like Remains of the Day. Waiting on somebody and being dutiful. So we get to see what people might aspire to have as a friend or an artificial thing. But we never really got to see, other than Klara, what it meant to be lifted. I mean, once we figured out lifted was edited their genes, we didn't get a sense of the other kids except in that nasty interaction of what the point of being edited was. I mean, all we saw from her, she apparently got sick from it. But I was sort of interesting to me that if this was what the society was doing now, is editing their kids, we didn't get to see why or what that meant. I don't know if anybody else had that thought.
Yeah, I think I was actually going to ask a moment ago, and it goes right in with your question. I was okay with him like learning things as I went along. And lifted, I never thought about it that way, but when I first read it, I wondered what it was. But then you get the sense that they were special for one reason or another. You're not really sure why. But by the end of the book, that was like the one piece of information that I felt was incomplete, and I really wanted to know more. What did it mean? Was this an operation as a child? It didn't seem like it. I mean, as a baby, it seemed like they were older when this editing happened. But then why did she get sick? I wanted the specific, like, give me exactly what was done to make these children this way, so that I could logically go, all right, this is why she gets sick, or she never answers that.
But what did it accomplish? Because the one person we saw who was edited was terribly sick and dying. So what were they trying to accomplish?
But I think that what that represents is that it was the parental perception and societal perception that there are few very, very good jobs and a sort of limited number of spaces in a sort of elevated part of society. And so if your child seems intelligent and seems socially engaged, then you can have this operation performed, understanding that that's the only chance your child has to have a great future, but B, at this point in these operations, one potential risk is the child could die. And in fact, of course, Josie's sister did die. And yet the mother was so intent on trying to lift her daughter. And of course, you know, the echo here is the people who pay $500,000 to get their daughter into USC. I mean, it's basically the same issue, which is to try to make sure that your child gets the best possible chance in life. And I think that the way that is laid out in the book and the sort of humanity of it is because of Rick's mother making the opposite choice. And partly you kind of assume, it's never said, but you kind of assume that partly that she doesn't want to do that because she did know that Josie's sister died from it. And that so, but the choice but that choice of hers then limits what Rick, the kind of arc of Rick's life. And in other words, it puts him into the lower tier of life for the rest of his life, regardless of his intelligence. And he's obviously hugely intelligent. And so then you're back to Bernard Shaw's argument about how, you know, societies only work well when the really bright people from every layer of society somehow have a voice in making society better. Yeah, what are you going to say?
I guess I thought in the end that Rick did make it into the prestigious school, so that he was one of the an unlifted exception.
Yeah, he was one of the very few unlifted exceptions. You're right, but I mean, under general circumstances, had he not had that connection to that man, and that was a really creepy scene. That her revisiting her ex-lover, but had she not had that connection, you know, Rick would have been, you know, sort of stuck. But you're right. That, yeah, he got one of the very few sort of personal exemptions. Anybody else?
James,
Yeah.
James, I thought it was the logical extension of those countries, like I think Germany is one, where they make young people take these tests, and you are tracked to the better university or a technical school or a trade when you're only a teenager. And I didn't think much about an operation. I just thought, well, this is in the future where they have taken that logic somehow and are identifying which young people are going to be on this, you know, gifted track, and other people are going to be left behind.
Anybody? I'm sorry.
Diane wanted to say something.
Diane.
I got the sense that there was some kind of genetic engineering, because at one point in the story, she talked about, I think it was before that, but then it was again when Rick was telling Chrissy what Josie's message was, that it was her decision, that she would have chosen it all over again to be lifted. And I don't know whether it's specified or whether I just assumed that it was some kind of genetic engineering. And it reminded me of how competitive, you know, even in my son's era, and he's, you know, gosh, like 16 years out of college, the competition to get into, you know, the right, I mean, my gosh, it goes back to getting in the competition to get into the right daycare so you can get into the right grade school, so you can get into the right high school and college, and doing the right extracurriculars and, you know, being on that right track. And so it was like Chrissy and Josie had chosen for her to be lifted, even though Sal died from it. To gamble on it, to gamble her health on all of this in order to achieve that. And, you know, Rick's mother chose not to. And then he had to be, you know, try to be one of that 1 or 2% of unlifted that could still get into college. But the other comment I wanted to make, because I'm such a Star Trek geek, and for any of you that are a next gen geek, you know, there is an android named Data who spends his entire existence trying to understand human emotion. And Klara so reminded me of Data in terms of not only the aspects of her analytical skills and seeing things in frames and, you know, just kind of the way she looked at the world, but also trying to constantly understand Josie and her emotions and how people emote together and relate to each other. And it was so much like Data that it was just fascinating. And, you know, Data is for those of you who are not Star Trek nutcases, Data is the android in the Next Generation series. And his whole existence is trying to become more human.
And doesn't James, I saw your hand up. I'll get to you in just one second. And doesn't the moment where Klara even says, you know, the more I'm around humans and the more I'm around Josie, I learn more about emotions and I feel more things. So she was starting to sort of assemble feelings. Larry, I think I agree with you, Larry, that is what it's like, but I do think within the book, they were genetically altered. But with the same idea of, you know, assigning people a track that you're on, that yes, many societies did for a long time. Yeah, I'm sorry, James, go ahead.
Oh, I'm Jim. I'm another Jim. I noticed just one thing. They did have a name for it. It was AGE, which is some sort of genetic engineering, I'm sure. Trying to remember what else I was going to say. But I also realized we are introduced to this whole world by virtue of the artificial friend, and so because of that, we have limited knowledge. We learn along with her, so she's sort of our introduction to the whole society, and what she doesn't know or what she doesn't learn, we don't learn. But I also think that's a nice way to get us into the book. We have someone who we learn with her. We learn that, for example, when she compartmentalizes things, that she is having issues and we have to work with her through it. She's our partner through this.
Yeah, I agree. Linda, you're okay.
I'm just agreeing with what he said.
Thank you.
Earlier today, Diane and I had a little conversation, and I said I thought it was ironic, or I felt like they were trying to improve their children to basically end up like Rick. I mean, Rick was already an excellent human without being modified. And it seems as though somehow this genetic interference took away these children's ability to interact and to have any kind of compassion and kindness. And as Diana and I were talking, I was telling her that there's a really good episode from the spring of This American Life. It's called something like The Campus Tour is Canceled. But it's that same idea where these parents are spending all this money for ACT tutors and things like that to give their kids these advantages. And yet now that ACT scores aren't being used right now because kids can't be tested because of the pandemic, the college recruiter or the college admissions are really looking more at the kid instead of their test score. So it's kind of the same idea where you can try to buy the advantage, but in the end, the better child is the more well-rounded and maybe kid that's been more encouraged to be creative in their own rights and to learn in their own right instead of relying upon this modification.
Didn't you think that Rick was better than almost all the other kids by the end?
Definitely, yes.
Of course.
Yeah.
Sure.
He was the one that was truly human and who, you know, kind of had, I don't know if I want to say more empathy or more, just kind of more real. And clearly this genetic engineering had these high risks. Again, because when at that near the end part when Rick is saying, you know, that she chose to take the risk. She gambled with high stakes. and it almost didn't work.
Right. Well, and Rick, I'm just trying to process all of your comments, which is great, which are great. The sense of caring and compassion and kindness. I mean, Klara seems, and Klara keeps repeating her job over and over again, is to help Josie escape loneliness. You know, and that, to me, if you take escaping loneliness, the way that you're lonely is if you're not engaged with other people or engaged in your own life. And I think, and just think about what all these kids that we know, you know, our own kids or our, you know, friends' kids, who for the last year have basically learned the way the people in the books, this book learn. They learn at home on their oblong, and they, you know, they don't interact with each other. And the one time we see a group of these lifted kids together, you know, it just sort of makes your hair stand up on your neck, because you just think, oh my God, you know, they've become too much alike. You know, there's a kind of rigidity that's implied is somehow in this. So it's almost like this genetic altering is turning them into something, if you'll pardon the twist of logic, into something almost robotic about the way they interact. Yeah, yes, Linda, what?
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say, and you said it. Is that the arc of Klara and the arc of these children? Klara is you know, is showing some notion of spirituality, where the sun as a god or as the machine as evil, and yet these children are moving towards robot. You're right, exactly. That's, and when you started, I said that's exactly what's happening. Is that they're going like this.
Do we know why the children are isolated? We don't, do we? I mean, there could have been a pandemic. We don't know. There's no explanation. So it's sort of hard to know whether this is part of their programming or their engineering or what. But the sense was that people were aware that social skills were important. And they had to mash kids together one way or another to get them to learn these things.
Mm. And yeah, they had to learn socialization again. Yeah, you're right. And there is a sort of implication that that there is some kind of environmental, some event that's you know, that the world is less safe physically than it used to be. Let me see. I want to make sure. So one of the questions that if you read interviews with Ishiguro, you know, one of the things that he's kind of obsessed with is, you know, what exactly is an individual? You know, what makes us, what individualizes us, and what is, you know, what are the things that we need to be a successful individual? I mean, the book is oddly optimistic in my mind. I mean, it's harsh, but there's something about him that I think is at bottom. He believes so fully, and I think some people who were critical of him kind of roll their eyes at this, but I think he believes so intently in the innate importance of kindness and empathy and caring and thoughtfulness, that's what he keeps writing about. He keeps writing about, that's the message that sort of, you know, is underneath all of his greatest books. And I think maybe that's why when I read this book, it made me want to go back to the very beginning of his writing and just read him straight through again. But of course I can't, because I own a damn bookstore and I have to read books. But I mean, if I didn't own a bookstore, what I would have done this spring was just read all of his other 7 novels again. Just to sort of fall into him one more time. But the so what do you think about that? I mean, is he a sort of idiot to think that kindness is critical in a time when our, the world is so out of control, with the way that we're developing, all of the other ways that, the world's sort of rocketing ahead of our poor brains to sort of, at least my poor brain, to take things in. Thank God Nancy and Caitlin just, sort of put up with me because I say, so how do you do that thing again with the computer where but it's, I think it's, the world's a very, very scary place. And what's the role of kindness and empathy and caring? I mean, what is the role of Klara? And Klara absorbing these things and being so determined. And I love whoever it was who said that, that she has a kind of this belief in the sun, a kind of religious belief in the sun. And it's always capitalized in the book whenever she mentions it. It's just, but what is the role? Are we headed towards the time when, when Caitlin's my age, that the word kindness will have even fallen out of vocabulary? I mean, I don't know. It's a scary time. People talk about that while I talk to my dog for a moment.
I think Caitlin has a response.
This was kind of answering that question, but also answering kind of the larger question. So I read this at the beginning of last month. So I wrote notes while I read it so that I would remember things. And one of the notes that I wrote down, I didn't write the quote that triggered the thought, but I wrote that AFs can't replace real people, not because of technology, but because of human relationships that create a person's soul, ? And so there was a specific line that talked about that it was like this, the kind of the space between people that Klara couldn't understand. And that's kind of, I felt like the gut of the author's message of like what separates artificial technology or intelligence or liftedness from that thing which is human. And I think that ties also into Klara's belief in this spiritual son and like her kind of journey with understanding the things that you can't grasp, right? And I think that's kind of where she felt more human than some of the humans in the story to me at times, because she was grappling with that extra thing that I feel like a lot of the humans in the story had kind of like dismissed.
Caitlin, maybe it was the part where Josie's father and Klara are talking and he says something about knowing your heart. A heart is a room and a room and a room.
Yes, I think that's, yeah, that sounds familiar.
Or something like that.
Well, and I think near the end where Klara said something about she thought she could have done the task that might have been requested of her, in essence, to become Josie, to become the next iteration or whatever of Josie, but it wouldn't work not because she couldn't do it, but because of the love of the other people. I forget the exact quote too, the love of the other people for Josie was something that couldn't be replicated by her becoming, in essence, an extension of Josie.
That's exactly.
And it was a beautiful quote. I mean, it brought me to tears.
Well, I wonder what would Klara make of I don't know, something with Caitlin, it was something that you said, but you know, during the pandemic now, I mean, Klara's trying to learn about humans to become as close to human as she can. What if the only way she had to learn, like right now, was, you know, what if she was on the Zoom call with us and was just another square and trying to figure out what does it mean to be human? You know, who are these people? And, you know, I don't think she'd ever, because of her limits, I mean, that, you know, again, that uniqueness of being a human, you'd never be able to bridge just seeing us on these squares and not seeing us in real life. I'm actually not saying this very well. I'm trying to put it together in my head, but I mean, clearly we're all human, but what makes each of us unique, you know, because a lot of people on this call I know in person, but a lot of you I don't know. I just know you as a square on Zoom. And I think I like you all. You all seem like really nice people that I'd like to sit down and have a cup of coffee with, right? Or, you know, whatever, we'd meet in the bookstore. But at the end of the day, we can't ever bridge that, I think, that uniqueness of what makes each of us human until we can actually be together and somehow look into each other's eyes, look into each other's soul as being a little dramatic, but that's the part of who we are that as a robot, I mean, I think Klara got really close, but you know, she never was going to get there. And I thought that it was really interesting. After I finished the book, I went online and I read a couple of, I didn't write down where it was from. The best review story I read, I think it was in the Atlantic, but in talking about the book and the themes, but the author mentioned that Klara, I'm sorry, I don't know. I for some reason I wanted to say Klara, and then I thought, well, maybe it should be Klara. I don't know, but that it means bright, shining, clean, which you know, I thought was just another insight into what Ishiguro was trying to tell us of who she was. She was kind of this clean slate, this blank slate, being fed by the sun.
So Mary Pat, you're having trouble defining what that means. So how could it be programmed into an AF? You can't even define it. How to program.
Right.
But yet on the other hand, I mean, I felt like she did have emotion in the sense that, I mean, she really cared about wanting to make Josie well, to the point of walking across 3 fields to this barn where she believed the sun slept, and she believed the sun was kind of the giver of all nourishment, because she was solar powered. And she thought if she, in essence, kind of prayed to the sun, that she could somehow help she wanted to make Josie better.
Mm-hmm. Allison, did you have a comment?
Well, I think just to tag on to what Diane just said, I mean, I think that's where she does come really close to seeming human. And at times she seems more human and empathetic than many of the human characters in the book do, apart from Rick maybe, and possibly his mother. But I mean, I sometimes read, I mean, I'm not a dystopia fan, so I kind of came to the book with a bit of a bias against it, but I felt that sometimes Klara almost comes across as like the innocent narrator, you know, who's slowly gaining experience. Or maybe it was just me wanting to project human qualities onto her, you know, oh my God, I wanted Klara to be my friend, you know. So, but yeah, I don't know that I'm articulating that very well, but she's complicated.
Well, I think you're right, Allison. I mean, and everybody else. I mean, she gets more complicated the more she takes in. And I think somewhere, the reason I've been looking down is I've been trying to find in that long article that the New York Times Magazine did about Ishiguro about 2 months ago when the book came out. I'm sure it was in there, but I of course can't find it now. But that he was talking to an AI guy, and the guy said, we've sort of gotten to the point where it's easy at this stage with artificial intelligence to give with Ian McEwan's novel Machines Like Us. That whatever it was, that AI human, had a huge amount of information, in its systems. But what this guy told Ishiguro, and I think this is what scares him most, is that they're now, the way that they're developing more complicated AI systems is to have them learn from each other in a sort of much more human way. And so, I think that's really the point of that aspect of the book, is that the difference between human and AI is shrinking all the time. And if they get to the point where they do feel, as Mary Pat said, just very much like anybody else in one of these squares, then that's problematic.
James, I thought by the end of the book, I thought she had achieved humanity. I haven't read a book this fast in years. I felt like she was my artificial friend by the end of the book, and that she and Rick and Josie were the three characters in the book that had the humanity. But she was more gifted than the other artificial friends, because she had more self-awareness and was knowing things. And I felt she continued to learn from all the humans. But when Rick and Josie were doing the thing with the drawing and the filling in the bubbles, that was such a great example of creativity. And I do want to ask the question that I felt like I did totally get the end. So I would be really interested in hearing comments about the end of the book, but I just want to say how much I loved it.
Oh, great.
Do you know what I thought about the end?
Yeah, let's talk about the end.
I thought that Josie and the butler from The Remains of the Day were kind of similar characters, and that they'd spent their whole lives in service to people that weren't necessarily the greatest people, and then the end of their life is just thinking back and maybe not a lot to show for it, or made the right.
Klara and the butler.
Oh yeah, did I say Josie? Yeah, Klara.
But the butler really ruined his life. It felt like he'd made a mistake, though. And Klara seemed to have such equanimity all the way to the end. Yeah. And she had that sort of childlike optimism. I think she's going to give optimism to the book, because she had a sort of childlike naivete or optimism or something. But I mean, that's a difference in the butler, right? That he suddenly came to this realization he'd wasted his life. And I don't think Klara came to that, right?
No, it's just like literally put out to pasture with nothing but her memory.
Yeah. And that whole duty thing really reminded me of the butler.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
Well, and I have a comment, maybe a question. I think it's interesting to trace her emotional development, if we can even call it that. The first emotion I think that she feels is loneliness, which is what we talked about a little bit earlier. She's lonely, she's put in the back corner and so on. And the other part that I don't really understand was her very emotional response to the bull, and later on to the sheep in the barn. The picture of the sheep in the barn. Her reaction to the bull was so amazingly, I don't know, emotional. And I wondered if anyone had any thoughts about that, but it seemed to be an emotional kind of reaction.
It did. I agree hold it, the dog's going to start barking. Does anyone have an idea about that? I mean, well, just very briefly, and then I'm going to go to mute for a minute. To me, that was emblematic of the unknown. You know, that she had never had any contact with something like that, and that probably, who knows what else she might have seen in the store or outside, but that it had a kind of personification of evil, and you know, that she had no other way of reacting to it other than just total fear. Yeah, Caitlin.
Well, I kind of attributed it to her programming in some ways, that she had no ability for meanness or judgment, like negative judgment towards people. And so because part of her role as an AF was to protect Josie, maybe there was some conditioning of like things that are generally dangerous or aggressive. And so I felt like it felt like an emotional response, but I thought, well, maybe there was some sort of protective trigger that had been in her programming with the bull.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
But you didn't feel that towards the sheep. You saw the picture of the sheep and she thought how kind they were.
Yeah. Well, let's just do a little mind exercise about that. Let's do a picture of a very muscular bull on our heads with the horns and a sort of sweet, goofy-looking sheep. I think just visually, it's, you know, she's
From what we know, though, that's based on our experience.
true.
Yeah.
Exactly. But also, I mean, you know, when you come across something that you don't know, I think if it looks in all of the things you've taken into your brain over the life, you're just as she did, you know, she's been imprinted with all of these, with various things, and as Caitlin suggests, programmed for certain things, but that there's something, you can feel the anger sometimes in animals. Just, you know, when I walk dogs, that's my whole life around dogs, I can tell the difference between a dog that's angry and a dog that isn't. And size doesn't really matter. As Nancy can attest, because I had my entire finger shredded by a dog that wasn't very big once. But I don't know. That's a really great question, Jim. I mean, because it is, and I think we've danced away from. Oh, Kate, yes.
I was thinking about the bull thing, like I kind of saw it as like she is basically a computer program, right? So she had someone program her with certain kinds of information, and it would only be the kind of information that you theoretically would need as an AF. And so I was thinking of it as kind of like the bull was just something so wildly outside of her realm of knowledge that she just couldn't process it, and it became a fear response. And like, even if it had been, I mean, she knew what a bull was, but it's the same as like, it's kind of a dumb example, but when I was in Spring Green 2 years ago, I've like grown up in cities my whole life, and I saw deer and turkeys for the first time, like in the wild. And obviously I knew what they were, but I was like, oh my God, these are like nature. This is nature. So I kind of wondered if maybe that was something, a kind of a similar experience that she had as well, where it was just a way to show that different from other AF, she was kind of like pushing the bounds of what it means to be a robot or a human.
Yeah, and I think that's a really smart idea. And we keep, you know, her boss, her manager, kept saying for the whole first third of the book how different she was and how developed she was, and how much she. I know, Hannah. I know it's really time for.
And maybe she associates the bull with that confusing trip when she was the first time she was separated from Josie, and went on that trip with the mother, which was kind of an odd thing for her.
Yeah.
And so, you know, maybe
That's what happened. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just surprised that she could feel fear, which I don't think of as a computer reaction.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, true.
That showed she was becoming more human.
Right.
I can't remember now, but was that one of the moments in which she compartmentalized, you know, her vision became little boxes? I just can't remember whether.
Before then, yes, I guess.
See, that's when her vision sorts into those boxes, that could be the essential equivalent of fear or anxiety or you know, whatever.
Sort of an emotional overload kind of.
Yeah, right. I have to say that this whole thing made me want to go back and read, who was the science fiction writer who wrote I, Robot?
Robert Heinlein?
Yeah, Heinlein. Made me want to go back and read what were the societal and philosophical questions that he raised in that book.
Yeah.
Because I'm not sure anything has changed.
No. There's a great, I must have read this in college, so I'm probably going to misquote it. In Kurt Vonnegut's wonderful novel, Cat's Cradle, there's a moment where one of the characters is reading a book about the future, and he's reading the 25th chapter. Oh, it's the 25th chapter of the Book of Bokanon. And the title of the chapter is "What Can Mankind Reasonably Expect for the next 1,000 years based on the experience of the last 2,000 years?" And then Vonnegut writes, "It's a very short chapter. It consists of one word and a period. And here it is, nothing." And so, yeah, I think, you know, these guys, these men and women who write these things, they're hoping we're going to get better, but I don't know. Larry, we didn't really get to your sense of the ending of it. What was it that you didn't understand?
Well, was she just breaking down or losing her abilities because that liquid had been taken away, or was it obsolescence that she was kind of put out to pasture?
Well, in my opinion, it's obsolescence, because that's one of the themes of the book. You know, is people being replaced by something, you know, better, quote unquote, and that she had done her job, and by this time they're probably at, you know, level 5 artificial friends, so she's not useful anymore. But of course, what's unbelievable, you know, is her last comment to the manager at the end of the book, where the manager says, you know, I can move you, I can have the men move you to a better place with more to look at. And she says, "No, thank you, manager. You're as kind as ever, but I like this spot, and I have my memories to go through and place in the right order."
I also thought that she was there not just because of obsolescence, but every IF was unique to their human friend. And when that human person grew up, then there was no other use. You can't just put her to another teenager, which I thought was kind of interesting. I mean, that's how I interpreted that. It was not just technological obsolescence, but it was the unique match between an AF and their human.
Yeah, and you know, and we're never, I think, you know, we human beings, this whole idea of obsolescence, and you know, we've kind of been programmed to believe that we shouldn't be satisfied with what we have that probably would be good enough for our entire lives, although the AF outgrows, at least it seems, the childhood friend. But, you know, it's kind of a comment just on us, the AF. Klara is kind of a comment on us as humans. You know, this obsolescence at the end, there's already how many new versions. I mean, the same thing happens to us all the time. You know, a new version of your car comes out. Oh, a new iPhone comes out. We think we have to have that. You know, I mean, everything changes. I went to order a new pair of gym shoes the other day. I thought, oh, I'll just order the same ones. Well, the ones that I had were literally 2000-7. Well, now they don't have the -7s. Now it's the -10s. I'm like, this was a perfectly fine shoe. It's old and worn out. But, you know, so maybe he's kind of commenting on, I mean, not just commenting on the AFs, but commenting on us as humans that, you know, we should be more satisfied with where we're at and what we have and not always trying to be better.
Yeah.
Did the store going out of business mean that artificial friends had lost their popularity?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder, well, maybe maybe, you know, maybe things have already progressed to some other stage. Where did they say that, what had happened? I forget. That's a really good
The
question.
store wasn't there, and I assumed that it went out of business because Klara thought it was just a different location, but it sounded like it wasn't. And the fact that the manager's job now was like he was in charge of the obsolete AFs made me feel like his career was no longer relevant either.
That's right. Well,
One person commented that didn't exactly move, which made it sound somewhat sinister, and that sentence was never finished.
yeah.
So it seems somewhat sinister in some sense, like maybe they could have been outlawed, they could have been, I don't know, any number of things.
Right.
Manager said something about when Klara asked her if she was still there, and she said something about, no, I haven't done that in many years or something.
Right.
So that gave me the sense too, that maybe it just didn't exist anymore and there was something now, maybe society had moved on to something totally different.
Well, maybe they, you know, the systems that were making the kids sick, maybe that got fixed, you know, in the so that they didn't need the artificial friends anymore. Who knows?
I got the sense that it made me feel a little bit like the manager was like peddling phones. Like if you think of, you know, like a phone store that just goes out of business in like a strip mall and that person just moves on to something else. Like that's the kind of quality it had to me. Because at the end, to me, it seemed the manager had lost her job and she was just scavenging in the junkyard. Like I didn't think she worked at wherever Klara was at the end. She was just kind of trying to make ends meet by, you know, wandering around in that area.
That's right, she was scavenging. Maybe she was replaced by some kind of AI thing.
Substituted,
just like father.
Yeah.
All
Okay.
right. Should we talk about next month?
Okay. Let's.
Okay. So we've chosen a book that neither James nor I have read yet, but Todd has and recommended highly. And this
50 pages last night. It's really good.
okay. This is a book that people have been buying in the store for the cover. You can't see the detail, but what this is all Native American beadwork. It's a beautiful cover. So I'll just read the back quick so you know what we're talking about. One snowy winter's day, Rosalie Ironwing returns to the home from which she was taken as a child. Orphan, widow, and mother, journalist and gardener, Rosalie has spent the previous 2 decades watching as her white husband's family farm is threatened first by drought and then by a predatory chemical company. Now grieving, she finally begins to confront the past and embrace the future, and in the process, learns what it means to be descended from women with souls of iron, women who have protected their families, their traditions, and their precious cache of seeds through generations of hardship and loss. So this is, she's a Native American woman. And as a child, she was taken and put into a white school. Right, James? I think that's what it is. So Diane Wilson is the author. So this book comes from a lovely little press in Minneapolis called Milkweed. And I'm going to tell you that we have 2 in the store and we have more on order, but we're hoping that those come in soon so you can get your hands on this. So we'll talk about this one on May 19th.
Is it nonfiction?
No, it's fiction.
Oh,
But
it is fiction.
It
Okay.
is, yeah, and I'm not sure if this is her family story or where the inspiration came from. But it's been getting great reviews. Beautiful review from the Braiding Sweetgrass author, Robin Wall Kimmerer. Okay, and then James, do you want to talk about, we're going to tell you 2, so you can get a leg up on your reading here. So June 16th, we're going to talk about
In the Company of Killers, Brian Christie's novel that I wrote about last week. And one of the things I admire about it, and I think it's important to take on this book. It's a complicated thriller, but it's because of Brian's work, and I'll probably he's going to participate. He'll be part of the evening. He'll be in his own little box. So Mary Pat can have a new person in a box. But
Can I determine how human he is? He better be ready.
yeah, it's
Good vote.
but he worked for many years for National Geographic, helping to track down people who are, illegally hunting endangered species around the world. And this book is kind of, it's a thriller and a kind of espionage thriller on one level in the sort of model of John le Carré, but it has this, the kind of moral center of it really is the environmental issues and people's behavior with animals. And I just think it's an unusual combination that people aren't doing this kind of book very much. And I think it's an exciting, and it's just an awfully good thriller too. I mean, it's really well written. He's never written fiction before. He sort of made himself quit National Geographic 3.5 years ago to try to write a novel. And now he's this character he's created, Tom Clay, is now he's going to be he's halfway through a second book. First book took him 3 years, and then he's written the half of the second one in the last 4 months, because he's now figured out how to, he's got it in his brain how to do it. He's a really interesting man. I met him a couple of years ago and spent a few days hiking with him in the far southern part of the world. And it's just, I think you'll really enjoy the book, and then you'll enjoy him because he's just like, a normal schmo. He's like the rest of us. It's just
What's his last name?
Christie, Christy.
correct. Yep.
Yeah. In the Company of Killers. And like le Carré, I mean, you get information that you just wouldn't have in any other way, because the way because of what he's lived, what he personally has lived, and the kind of stuff that he's done. So it's really kind of, that's the part I always love about, I also mentioned Ward Just in the review. I mean, you just feel like these guys who really know how certain things operate, they write with a kind of level of sophistication. You think, geez, wow. Holy crap. So, I mean, the book is kind of filled with holy crap moments. So I think, but one of the reasons we wanted to tell you this far in advance is that, it's not, it's more complicated. You know, you're just going to get a lot of information thrown at you that you wouldn't ordinarily sort of have to take in. So it's, and one last thing I wanted to show you, which is the beautiful British version of Klara and the Sun. I agree. I think Klara feels better than Klara, but I just love this edition because it's so austere. It just seems to match the book much better than the American one. But okay, anything else?
I think that's it. And also maybe when you're reading this one, just keep in mind that Brian will be with us. So you'll have the advantage or the opportunity to ask him questions about why or what. And so another way to think of things as you're reading that book, if there's something you'd like to ask the author.
Yeah, yeah. He's very excited to join, and he's very pleased about the response so far. So anyway, that was great tonight. You guys all had really lots of good ideas. I feel like I learned a whole bunch about the book, so that's great. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank
We'll
you.
see you next month on the 19th.